So, welcome to the first of our live conversations in the paid speaker breakthrough training group. And thank you to everybody who's had a lot of patience since we had some technical glitches on Tuesday. So, looking forward to this conversation. Now, our guest today is Bron Williams. I know who Bron is because she's been in my world for quite a while now. But, Bron, for the rest of the people who may not know you, who are you and what are you known for?
Okay. I'm in my third act of life. The grey hair is a giveaway. First act, I was a teacher, got married, had children, what we'd consider the normal things of life. Then come midlife, and as often happens to many people, got divorced and needed to reinvent myself. And so joined the Salvation Army. I had a strong traditional Christian background. So I joined the Salvation Army, became an ordained minister, could bury people, marry people, ended up working on Nauru with the asylum seekers, came back to Australia. The Salvos took me to Melbourne, and it was there that I then entered my third act of life, which is I had always wanted to be a professional speaker. So turned 60, figured that was the time to start a business because that's what you do when you turn 60. And that's what I've been pursuing now for the last 8 years, is as a professional speaker. And I braved the wilds of online dating, met my dear husband, Bill. We got married last year. So life has had some really great things. So what am I known for? Now I am known for advocating for women to be able to retell their story, to tap into their power.
Amazing.
To no longer play the sit down, be quiet, play small game.
Yeah, I think we're all up for that, men and the good men of the world and women. What was your driver? You mentioned there, decide at the age of 60, you got a business, pursue professional speaking. What was your driver to become a speaker?
It was something I'd always wanted to do. I actually did my first speaking gig when I was 22 with a youth group that I was part of, and I was asked to give the message at the end of the year, and I loved that. So I got hooked on being the centre of attention, maybe, but also it was also just the idea of being able to speak out of my heart to people and have what I understand and my perspectives be able to help other people. And so you've been a public speaker for many years as a teacher, as a Salvation Army officer, who was doing messages every Sunday. So I think the driving force really behind all of that is to make an impact, and that's what I've always wanted to do. And I got to 60, and the Salvos are great, and they look after their officers well if you've got a certain amount of experience and service behind you, and I wasn't going to have that. And so I knew I was going to have to look after myself, and figured it was better to do it at 60 than wait till 67 when 100%. I was at retirement age.
Yeah. So you've actually discussed right there, you've actually given us the insight. I want to come back to the speaking in a moment because it's been quite a journey. But there's 3 major transformation points in that and 3 major reinvention points, to use your own language. What does reinvention take?
Oh, that is a really good question. There's a certain amount of trying to figure out what you're about. And that takes work. And as you know, I had what I call my chrysalis year, which, we think it's so beautiful, a butterfly, and a little caterpillar goes into its cocoon and then it emerges a butterfly. But the reality is inside that cocoon, inside that chrysalis, the caterpillar dissolves and reforms. And that's exactly what I think reinvention is. It's not about tacking on something to what you are. It is actually about complete transformation. And I have 2 dragonfly tattoos, and they're symbols of transformation. So, I think it's very much about becoming something quite different, but that is also still has the essence, like the butterfly still has the essence of the caterpillar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that because what I heard in that description was it's not adding to, it's actually re-emerging.
Yes.
Right, you're not just adding something else on, you're actually re-emerging. And I know from having got to know you, you bring all of the parts with you. So I love that about what you do. So when you first started speaking, when we first met, I don't know, was it 5 or 6 years ago, maybe
Mm,
even more now? When we first met, you were coaching and wanting to speak on a specific topic. Can you take us into very briefly that first topic?
yeah. It was the whole idea of a backstory. I love
Yeah.
films, and backstory is a term from the film industry because it's what has happened to a character before they step foot onto the stage. And it explains why a character may have a limp. Was
Yeah.
it from a gunshot battle or from falling off their bike as a kid? And each of those backstories changes how the character shows up in the world. So that was what was interested me, because I had my own backstory and I knew
Mm.
the influence that it had on me and the shape my life took.
Yeah, I love the way that you came. You had so much conviction around backstory, and we've been smiling recently because we realize it's still actually underpinning a lot of what you
Mm,
do. I know from my perspective, so for those watching who don't know either of us, I know from my perspective, we went on a little bit of a discovery journey when we first met because you came in wanting to speak on backstory. I know from my perspective about the shift that I chose to encourage you to make. Can you
mm,
tell us a bit, like, from your perspective, the shift that you made, what that shift was to, and how you felt moving into that?
yeah. Yeah, well, the shift was to unconscious bias, because, and there was some good reasons around that. And I think one of the best reasons was that I always had to explain what backstory was. And
Mm.
that, in a sense, made the journey or the process much more difficult. Whereas
Yeah.
people understood the idea
Mm.
of unconscious bias. It was a term that was starting to be understood, particularly in the business world. So that was really important. There was a grieving. I know, one of your lovely little phrases is about killing off your favourite child. Um,
Yeah.
not in reality, but in terms of concepts and ideas. And I needed to do that. But I see
Mm.
that backstory was a really important place. I needed to start somewhere, and it was
Yeah.
a solid foundation, but I could shift. Actually, the work, there is still things in my programs today that I wrote when
Yeah.
I was looking at things from a backstory perspective. So it's still valid. It's
Yeah.
just shaped differently and the language is different.
Yeah, I love this because it's not like we have this major paints of reinvention for
Mm,
you because and our audience may not have heard it because you said it, but like you spent some time on Nauru and working with asylum seekers. Like that is as far removed from a teacher raising children as you can probably get, right? So there is massive points of reinvention. But what I also love in this last 6 or 7 years, what I've seen from you is evolution. And
mm,
so when you say like you haven't actually let anything go, you've had this incredible ability to continue to weave it in. And when we actually started working together, and I encourage you to look at that through that lens, and I've got to say, you jumped into it obviously because you were used to reinvention and evolution. um, I'm going to take you to a moment in time because we're actually ready to officially launch you. We've done everything ready to go. We were actually celebrating that at a particular point in time in 2020. Can you take us into what happened as we were about to launch you?
March 2020. I know
Yeah,
everybody's brains are going, oh, boing, 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 COVID. Yeah, we
yeah,
were at a Professional Speakers Australia event, their yearly event, and this was held in Adelaide, and we were all celebrating being speakers. I was so enthusiastic about, oh, right, I'm going to get myself, find some stages. And then, of
yeah,
course, the world shut down. But I
yeah,
also saw people who were well-established professional speakers having to deal with the fact that their whole worlds, their whole livelihoods were coming crashing down. And I remember saying to you that there was a sense in which I was in a better place because I had nothing to lose. I hadn't built anything at this point. So there was a sense in which I was a fresh slate, a clean slate,
yeah.
and I had no real preconceived ideas of how I could build a speaking business because the world had changed. I wasn't pivoting, I was just starting.
Yeah. And actually, you were so true. Everyone's like, pivot, pivot. And Bron's just like, well, how do I start now, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was one of the best conversations. It was a monumental weekend, as we've talked about often. I got my certified speaking professional that weekend. So it's kind of like, on one hand, congratulations, you've made the benchmark, you've been awarded the designation. And it was like, oh, by the way, you can't speak for an undetermined period of time. And so it was an interesting place to be. But I agree, in hindsight, that the fact that you were a blank slate while we watched others have their worlds completely blown up was an absolute blessing. We decided to work together to see how you could create it. And one of the things, if you remember, in one of the first client sessions, that we went online very quickly as a group. And I said to everybody, this could last 2 to 3 years, because I'd gone and looked at other pandemics. And more than half my clients left me at that point because they thought that I was nuts, that this thing would just be a couple of weeks. But my question was, if this is how it's got to be, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And you just decided to see what would happen. We worked together with some strategies, some messaging. You had a few connections that you'd already made on LinkedIn. What was the first contract you picked up as this reinvented Bron in the middle of a pandemic?
Just with Unilever in
Just
the United
with
States.
Unilever in the United States.
In the United States. And it came out of a referral. It was not somebody I knew who reached out to me. So she was referred by somebody that I did know, but who also was only an online connection, not an in-person connection. So that's the power of building connections, even if they're not yet relationships. And interestingly, the person who, so Vandana Kana, who was the person at Unilever, she's gone on to a different role, but I keep in touch with her still.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
it's
that's the
quite
key.
amazing.
It's the relationships, right? Like, everyone looks at connection points, but actually, how are you building the relationships out? Where are things coming from in the future? And I love that. Now, that first role that you picked up, or that job that you picked up with Unilever Australia, US, was all around unconscious bias.
Yes, that's right. It was about training, because they were wanting to roll out, Unilever as a global company were wanting to roll out unconscious bias training throughout their organisation. And they just wanted like a bit of a taster. And this was in their financial services division in the US. And of course, everybody is zooming in from all over the US as well.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. And we were actually, there was almost like a surge of conversation around unconscious bias, especially with some of the other events that happened in 2020.
Yes.
But it changed, the atmosphere changed. Can you walk us through just briefly what changed unexpectedly from both our perspectives?
There were a couple of things that changed. One was, as the pandemic progressed and then we moved out of the pandemic, interest in unconscious bias waned. It was very interesting. And I think part of it was a funding thing, because governments, companies were just throwing money at training during the pandemic, trying to keep their people engaged. And certainly crises like the pandemic does allow all our biases to bubble up, because we're stripped away. So there was, on the one hand, lots of work during the pandemic, and then it started to taper away. But the other thing that I can remember you saying to me, and I'd love to know how your brain comes up with these things, is you said, how about we look at bias as a data point for growth and change? And I loved that, and I still use that perspective, because one of my concerns, funnily enough, this has now led me into my PhD work, is that I had observed that when we talked about bias, people would get defensive, and what I wanted was to be able to talk about bias, because it's part of how we think, without guilt and shame. And so to remove that defensiveness. And so if we saw it as a data point, something we learned about ourselves, then we could look at it in a positive light.
Yeah, I really love that. You touched on something actually that came after we had that conversation, which actually led you to step aside from bias for a period of time. And it was, we're defensive and we're angry. And what we saw as the world opened back up was the amount of anger coming your way in the threads and the comments and the conversations, especially on LinkedIn, which was our unexpected bit.
Yeah, it was, because one of the things was people were pigeonholing me. They were pigeonholing me in the diversity, equity and inclusion space. And they were categorizing unconscious bias purely in that space. And yes, it does fit. However, unconscious bias is something that runs underneath all the work or over the top of all the work that you do in the DEI space. And so there were people were assuming things.
They're actually proving your argument.
That's right. Assuming things about where my focus was, but more than that, where my focus should be.
Yeah.
And they were not happy when I pushed back against that. And at a personal level, I was still quite new to standing my ground. I could not stand my ground as well as I do now. Like, I'm fucking brilliant. Now, excuse my language, but I couldn't at that time. So I would get quite upset in myself, and then I would withdraw. And I can remember you saying to me, why does this person's opinion matter so much? And in a sense, that was a question that was part of the journey to where I've got now, because their opinion mattered, because I'd been brought up to believe that my opinion didn't matter.
Yeah.
And that the voices who were strong, they were the ones you listened to, the voices of authority. So, honey, it all ties in together.
It does. It does. And actually, talking about all ties in together, it's all coming together. So we've been celebrating a lot of different things for you in the last few months. Can you just touch on that for us?
I've been doing something I didn't expect to do. I've been working with event companies running workshops. Now, they set up the workshops. They find all the people. I just have to turn up. I love that.
It's actually not a bad option, people.
It's not. It just takes the whole marketing out of it. It is, it can be uncertain because they can engage you for a workshop, and if they don't get the numbers, you don't actually get to do it. So, there's that. However, what I've discovered out of doing workshops is I love that intimate space that a workshop provides, where you can spend a day or 2 days with the same group of people. And the number of times, like, I had one woman come to me at the end of a day's session, and I talked about my own issues with, had an abusive marriage. I just one of those quietly, covertly, nasty, under the radar abusive marriages. And she had we came from the same faith background. And she said, I got more out of what you talked to me about today than I did with 3 years of with my psychologist.
Yeah.
Lived experience, lived understandings, insights. Like, I'm not a psychologist, but it's that sense of being able to impact people again. Yeah. So I've done that here in Australia. I've had my first overseas speaking gig, which I'm so pleased about, in Kuala Lumpur, working for a relatively new event company in Malaysia. And interestingly, after I'd finished that one in June, they wanted me to come back in October. This is where I said it's uncertain. They couldn't get the numbers in October. However, they've come back to me and said, would you be available in January to do the same thing?
I'm going to just point out, it wasn't just a quick gig. You did two day workshops, didn't you?
I did.
4 days altogether. And you flew, did you fly business class?
No, I flew cattle class.
Cattle class. But you stayed somewhere extraordinary, didn't you?
I did. I stayed in the JW Marriott.
Yeah.
And the workshops were held in the Hilton.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Ritz-Carlton.
No, so
yes,
like beautiful brands, beautiful experiences, and the opportunity to impact people on a bigger scale.
That's right.
If we bring it back to home just for a moment, and I'm really looking forward to knowing that you're going to head off again, hopefully in February. Bring it back to home as well. This discovery of loving workshops and facilitating, even more than the speaking, and we've got a lot of speaking engagements that you've done, but you also went and delivered some workshops for someone, and now you have a series of, is it 7 or 10 or something that you need to do?
10, yes.
Yeah.
So it was with an educational institution here in Melbourne, and it was a referral for their professional development day. Somebody said, Bron's really good at unconscious bias. So I did 4 sessions on one day, 2 in Lilydale and 2 in Box Hill. And then one of the staff had made the decision that she wanted to roll out unconscious bias training to all the staff by the end of the 2024-2025 financial year. And so she knew that she wouldn't get everybody to my sessions on the professional speaking, professional development day. And so, yeah, so I'm rolling out, I think, up to 10. I'm doing 3 this month and 1 next month. 2 in one day this month, you know, so yes. So yeah, there's such an adventure, both highs and lows in speaking.
Yeah. So, Bron, who inspires you? Because you've got this, and we haven't even touched on the PhD. We'll have to leave that for another conversation. But for those of you playing along, Bron is doing a PhD on the intersection of bias and shame, which is phenomenal work. So when we look at, like, there's reinvention, there's speaking, there's workshops, there's study, there's all these things. Who inspires you?
I've been asked this before, and it always makes me laugh because I inspire me.
Oh,
yeah. To be quite honest, look, there are people I love. I love Taylor Swift. I love the way she is so truly herself. You know, Oprah's done great things. And, you know, I can talk about Jacinda Ardern. But there's a sense in which I inspire me. I'm my biggest inspiration. I don't know what it is in me that just keeps wanting to do this stuff. That, you know, look, I'm 68 and I'm still got dreams and goals. And I just think there's so much in my head, and my brain just sparks. And I just got to keep going, keep doing.
I love that. I love that. You are the epitome of how we should live our next act. What are you excited about at the moment?
What am I excited? Well, I've actually been sitting here in the library because I come to the library to do my research, not because there's any books here in the library, but because it gets me into the right headspace.
Yeah.
And so I'm reading PDFs and stuff that I've downloaded. That excites me that I'm doing that. I've had an interesting journey so far. I've had to put in 2 proposals. Cross the fingers, we think the second one's been accepted. So that's taken me nearly 3 years to get to that point. I'm excited by doing this work because it's a huge challenge, and I shake my head sometimes and go, "Oh, Bron, what are you doing?" Because it's so new, and I'm not really familiar with the academic space. I don't speak the language and all of those things. That excites me. My marriage excites me. Hello, I'm still at 68. I'm in the honeymoon phase. You know, it's just wonderful. And it's wonderful for Bill too. Like, we found each other online. You know, we both had to wade through all sorts of relationships to get here. And we found each other, and we're just enjoying being husband and wife together. It's just delightful. It has been the easiest relationship I have ever had, even to the point I thought there must have been something wrong. It was so easy, you know, so it's beautiful. So that excites me. Oh, look, I've got, as I've said to you, I've got plans. I'd love to move to Darwin, be closer to Asia, to be able to bot fly over there. I'd like to work 8 months, live 8 months of the year in Darwin, work 8 months of the year, 4 months of the year when it's, you know, the hot and stormies up there, come back to Melbourne for the, you know, November to February, enjoy the warm weather down here. That's my dream. And I think that's the thing. I've been doing some meditations with Dr. Joe Dispenza. That keeps opening my brain up.
Yeah.
And I just think there is so much possibility in the world, and that excites me too.
Bron, we're going to have to wrap it up, but I just want one more piece of wisdom from you, because you and I are both guilty. We could speak all day long for weeks on end, and we quite often have, to be quite honest. When you think about, I'm just going to pull on some of your own words, like reinvention, speaking, it's an adventure, keeping on learning and growing and things like that. I'd love to know is, are those that may be just embarking on this wild, crazy adventure, or those that are actually wanting to go to that next level, wherever they may be at, thinking about speaking, reinvention, adventure, all that sort of stuff, what's your words of wisdom that you want to kind of share with people about what may be coming?
Okay. I think stay curious. That is probably the best thing to do, because we shut ourselves down and we shut possibilities down when we stop being curious. And I think that's probably the thing that excites me, is that while I can stay curious, who knows what might open up. So
Amazing, Bron. Thank you so much. I always love having you in my world. I'm hoping everybody else has loved this conversation. Please, as you're watching, let us know what you've loved. Let us know what you want to know more about. Bron will be all over the conversation as well. So do feel free to ask her more questions. Sorry, I just put Bron in on that one. But we will see you all in the comments and the chat, and we will see you next week for our next training session. Thank you so much.
Oh, great to be here.